Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to our presentation tonight. Choosing the right security camera for your home, business, or neighborhood. This presentation is sponsored as part of the Night Out Against Crime effort. This is a joint sponsorship by Belmont Hillsborough Neighbors and the Hillsborough West End neighborhood, who are both basically contributing some door prizes, some Wisecam version 3s, and we're going to be giving those away later this evening. So what I'm going to do today is spend some time talking about, I think, a lot of interesting questions, show the latest developments in security cameras, and then give you an opportunity to ask any questions, but just kind of show you what's out there, what's available, and the kinds of things you can buy today. So kind of the first question people always ask me is, what camera should I buy? Which is kind of a loaded question, because that's all I say to people. That's like asking, what house should I buy, or what car should I buy, or who should I marry? There are lots of simple questions in this world that have very difficult answers, and this is one of them. And what you find, of course, is the right camera is always going to depend upon your budget, your security needs, and of course your technical expertise. So what I want to try to do in this presentation is provide you with some information to help you answer that question on your own. And what you find is everybody has a different answer to that question: which camera should I get? So there are a lot of questions you do need to ask yourself if you're going to figure out what camera you want. First of all, what different kinds of security cameras are available? Where can you buy them? How much do they cost to purchase and set them up? Are there ongoing monthly, annual costs in order to use the cameras? And if you have certain needs, if you want to, for example, monitor your home, monitor your car, your backyard, whatever, what kinds of features and specifications do those cameras have to have? How difficult is it to install them and set them up? And do you need any other equipment besides those cameras? So I'm going to hopefully try to answer some of these questions, or at least give you an indication of where you can go to get those answers for yourself. So I want to emphasize that this talk is not about security systems, but it's about security cameras. So when you talk about security systems, you generally mean an alarm with door and window sensors to detect intruders and possibly call the police if somebody breaks into your home. And that's a very competitive market. There are lots of companies out there that offer that. But I'm not going to talk about security systems per se. I'm going to talk about the cameras which may or may not be part of the professional security system. So the question to ask is, what are the available options for a good high-performance security camera? What can you buy? What's out there? Well, I always like to first talk a little bit about some of the history. Where did security cameras come from? Well, back in 1980, 30 some odd years ago, when you talked about a security camera, you were talking about closed circuit TV, which is something you watched on an old analog style TV, no digital TV. You recorded things on videotape. These cameras worked, but only barely. You really had pretty poor image quality. It was a consequence of the type of technology we had. It was very difficult to identify people or read license plates unless you had some very expensive optics, very expensive cameras. So this was not the kind of thing that typically homeowners or businesses really had. And if they did have them, generally the video quality was terrible. You could see a blob, you could tell something was going on, but you couldn't really see any details. But then things began to change. Starting in the 1990s, digital camera technology, the same kind of cameras we had, for example, in digital cameras that replaced film cameras. Well, that also began to migrate over into what we call the consumer and the prosumer markets. You begin to see digital security cameras instead of the old closed-circuit TV cameras. And initially, these were very delicate, very expensive, difficult to use, difficult to maintain. But once again, electronics technology, it advances. And what we've seen is over the past 10 years or so, the prices of security cameras have plummeted rapidly, just as we see with computers and cell phones. While at the same time, the quality and the durability have become much better. It used to be, for example, you had to have specialized enclosures to put cameras outside to protect them from the weather. Now the cameras are weatherproof, and so you can basically get an excellent camera that can endure the outdoor elements for very little money. And when you look at today at the modern camera market, you'll find that really the world leader is China in terms of high performance, low cost cameras. So what I'm going to talk about tonight, just about every camera I'm going to talk about, has actually been manufactured in China. So really, they're very much today driving that market. So when you talk about getting the right kind of cameras, it's always a trade-off, and the trade-off is between cost, ease of use, and the quality of the video. So most of us are very familiar, for example, with what we call consumer-friendly cameras. Ring, Nest, Arlo, Wise, these have been marketed to everybody for years. These are very easy to set up and use. Normally they run on Wi-Fi. You get good support, but they're limited in terms of what they can do. And then you have some other types of cameras I'm going to talk about tonight, what I call prosumer cameras. So companies like Dahua and Hikvision, which are two Chinese companies. And you can get those cameras, and what you'll find is they're more difficult to set up. It really helps to know something about computers and computer networking. But the support is limited. Normally, these companies will sell you the camera, but after that, you're kind of on your own. But on the other hand, they have a very wide variety of models with very advanced capabilities. These companies don't normally sell to consumers. They instead like to sell to resellers or to installers. But that doesn't mean you can't get the cameras. But you're going to find you have to kind of figure out on your own how to make them work and how to use them. So let's first talk about the basics of security cameras and what a security camera needs. So what do you have to have if you're going to have a good security camera? Well, first of all, you have to have a way of storing video. So some kind of local video storage, either like SD memory cards or a network video recorder, or what we call a NAS, a network attached storage server, or a computer hard drive. You have to have some place to store that video. Or you can store it over the internet in the cloud. You also have to have, of course, some way to connect that camera to the internet. You have to have either a wired or a wireless connection. This has to be connected to your own home or business network. And then through the internet, you can then watch the video, and you can record the video, and you can also control your cameras. You've also got to have electrical power. So cameras need some kind of power, battery power. You can see those today. AC power, plug it into the wall, and you also see something called power over Ethernet, which I'll talk about. There are also kinds of alternatives. For example, solar power. There are actually cameras now where you can install these, and they have their own solar panel and they have their own battery built in. So lots of different power options. Other things you have to look at are security camera specifications. Okay, what are the kinds of numbers you want to look at? First of all, one is resolution. The higher the resolution, the more detail you can see, and this is specified in megapixels. So if you know anything about digital photography or digital video, you've heard these terms before. And anywhere from 1 megapixel to 8 megapixel resolutions are very common. 2 megapixels is really pretty much the minimum you see today in most consumer cameras. If you see, for example, 8 megapixels, that's roughly equivalent to a 4K UHD TV, just to give you a comparison. Sensor size is also an issue. The camera itself has a sensor, which is what generates the video for you. In other words, that's behind the lens. The larger the sensor is better, and there's been a trend toward bigger sensors. Larger sensors give you higher resolution, and they also give better low light performance, which certainly matters at night. And what you find today is 1 over 2.5 inch and 1 over 1.8 inch sensors with 4 to 8 megapixel resolutions are very common nowadays. You can get cameras like that for less than $200. So, for example, there's an Amcrest model I'm going to show you. Show you the type of quality you can get from that in just a moment. Another thing you have to think about is the field of view, the viewing angle. How big of a picture does this camera get for you? This is specified in degrees. So the field of view is a function of the lens focal length, which is specified in millimeters, and also the sensor size itself. So wide field of views give you a big picture. They let you see, for example, your entire front yard. But at the same time, that limits the amount of detail of any individual item you can see. And then you have narrow field of view, In this case, you can watch doorways or windows or watch your car. So the larger the focal length, this in effect gives you more optical magnification. You get a smaller field of view, but you also see more detail in the image. And once again, this is a trade-off in terms of what you want. So here, for example, is an older camera I had outside my house. This is a 4 megapixel resolution, 1/3 inch sensor, 3.6 millimeter focal length, and an 83-degree field of view. I replaced that camera with this, and you can see the difference. Old, new. Notice how it's kind of zoomed in, a nice brighter picture. This was an 8 megapixel resolution camera with a 1/1.8 inch sensor, a 6 millimeter larger focal length, so more zoom, and a 55-degree field of view. So you basically have to choose those parameters depending upon what it is you're trying to look at. What you're trying to avoid quite often, and you see it here in this image, you're trying to avoid what we call wasted pixels. So an image that's just, recording the side of your house, it's wasted pixels. There's nothing of interest there. You want to focus in on something where something interesting is going to happen. So, lens type. When you look at cameras today, most cameras you see are fixed lens cameras. So you will have a particular focal length to go with the sensor size. So 2.8, 3.6, 4 and 6 millimeter focal lengths are very common in mini bullet and dome cameras, and I'll show some examples of those in a minute. But you also see varifocal lenses. These are cameras that have optical zoom, just as a camera would, old style cameras. So these have a variable focal length, and this lets you zoom in to whatever degree you want to in terms of the image you're trying to record. But you need to have a larger camera chassis because it needs more optics in there. And then, of course, what type of network connection are you going to have? When you look at cameras today, Wi-Fi, of course, is very common in a lot of less expensive cloud cameras. But even if you have Wi-Fi for your connection, you still have to have some kind of power for the camera. You need either AC or battery or solar power to run the camera. Power over Ethernet is far more common in more high-performance cameras, especially in a lot of the ones I'm going to talk about tonight. And this combines your data connection with your power in a single cable, just a standard Ethernet cable. Very, very common. You also will see something called HD over coax, for example, HD CVI. The nice thing about this is it allows you to reuse your coax cables from an older CCTV installation. So if you had older cameras put in and they used coax and they were analog cameras, you can pull those out and then you can put in these modern cameras and get digital video without having to run wires again. And in some cases you can see things, for example, you can use cell phone network, LTE cellular data connections are available for specialized cameras, and we'll talk about some of those in just a moment. Other specifications, you'll see PTZ, pan, tilt, zoom. So those are very common in a lot of indoor cameras. They're also available in high-end outdoor cameras. We'll talk about those. But in this case, you can move around and point the camera at a particular view if you want to. Zoom in and zoom out. Another thing you're going to see when you're looking at camera specifications is what's called the DORI numbers. Detect, observe, recognize, and identify. This is a measure of the quality of the image. And what you want is bigger DORI numbers. The larger the numbers, the better. The better you can see and identify what's going on in the image. And so higher resolutions and larger focal lengths give you those larger DORI values. Also, weatherproofing and vandalproofing. Weatherproofing nowadays is pretty common. Even in inexpensive cameras, they're going to be weatherproof. So the IP67 rating for outdoor cameras is very common. For vandalproofing, if you have a situation like that, you can look at different values, IK01 to IK10 ratings for vandalproof cameras. So once again, this depends upon the kind of environment. I mean, are you going to be installing a camera where people are going to be throwing rocks at it? You want it to be able to take that kind of abuse. So let's look at some examples of modern security cameras. Let's see. One moment here. All right. So first type of camera we want to look at are what we call your indoor or outdoor fixed view cameras. And these are the kinds of cameras everybody's very familiar with. These are the kinds of things, for example, Ring and Nest and Arlo and these types of cameras. Or if you have an installation by, for example, Comcast or AT&T or ADT, you'll see these types of cameras used a lot. They're typically not super high resolution. They're fixed position. They're very wide field of view. They're typically Wi-Fi connectivity. They will quite often have a built-in speaker or microphone. And they will also have night vision, infrared night vision. You can get these in either AC powered or battery powered options. They tend to be limited in video quality, but they're very common where ease of use and installation are desired. Then you have what are called indoor pan tilt zoom cameras. And again, these tend to be fairly low cost. These will have resolutions up to about 4 megapixels. And in this case, you can control the camera. You can pan or tilt, move the camera around to change your view. These tend to also be Wi-Fi connectivity with night vision, speaker and microphone. They also tend to have a built-in web interface, and I'll talk about what that means in just a minute. But these are very good choices for an indoor home security camera, especially a system you want to install yourself. Then we have outdoor mini bullet cameras. These are small size, typically fixed lens, and so no pan tilt zoom. 1 megapixel to 8 megapixel resolutions, night vision. They can be purchased in either wired or wireless models. Again, they have a web interface. And these are very good choices for what we call a wide area outdoor view. These are the types of cameras you'll see bundled with the DVR security systems. For example, you go to Costco or Walmart or some big box store and you'll see these security camera setups with multiple cameras. Those cameras tend to be these types. These fixed focal length, smaller cameras, and just meant to be installed outdoors, give you a very wide field of view. Then we have bullet cameras, which are a step up. They tend to be larger than the mini bullets, but what they will offer is varifocal lenses. So in this case, you can have the option of optical zoom. You can have models with as much as 12x optical zoom. You can get exceptional night vision in some of these models. These generally tend to be power over Ethernet connectivity. They're wired cameras, not wireless. And again, a built-in web interface. These are really good choice cameras for monitoring some area in a very high detail. So if you want to, for example, watch a door or a walkway and zoom in and see that specific area to get a really good image of a person going in and out, then this is a good type of camera. These cameras are also good for example, recording license plates, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. So, outdoor dome and mini turret cameras, that's another option. These are very similar in spec to the mini bullet and bullet cameras I just talked about, but sometimes people just prefer these types of form factors. They're less obtrusive. In fact, for example, you go into a department store or a grocery store and look at the ceiling, and you'll see these little domes. These are the types of cameras they're using, security cameras. They don't want the proprietors don't want to make it obvious that the cameras are there, so they use these types of form factors. They typically have the same types of specs you're going to see with the bullets and mini bullets, although once again they can also have pan, tilt, and zoom features. So these are good options. And then finally, the very large form factor pan, tilt, zoom cameras. These are big. These are not small cameras. I'll show an example here in just a while. But they can give you really exceptional performance. You can get zoom factors up to 40x or greater, so you get a lot of optical zoom out of them. You will occasionally see some with Wi-Fi support, but almost always these tend to be power over Ethernet cameras. They have very large Dory values. You can use them to record images and scenes from hundreds of feet away. And some of the more sophisticated models that are available today can be set up so that if, for example, somebody comes walking in your yard, it will identify them and then track them, zoom in and track them. So these are fairly sophisticated cameras in terms of what they can do. So recording and storing video, what do you need for that? Well, if you're going to store video, very common way that people do it, of course, is to use cloud storage. In other words, you upload your video to the cloud. That's what the camera is designed to do. And when we talk about the cloud, what we're talking about typically is a third-party server, maybe something operated by Google or Amazon. So obviously, this needs internet connectivity. Everything goes through the cloud server from the camera, and then you can watch it on your phone or on your laptop computer. But obviously, if you lose your network connection, then you have no more video. You're not going to be able to record anything. You typically, of course, have to pay for this. You have to pay for that server service, that cloud service. So that usually means some kind of monthly or annual fees. And what you normally find is the video is only stored as motion detection events, not continuously. That is an option now for some cameras, but you got to be very careful. If you want to do continuous recording to the cloud, that can mean a lot of bandwidth. Depending on your internet plan, your internet service, you can easily use up all your bandwidth trying to run lots of cameras and record continuously. And there are also issues of privacy. I mean, how secure is the recorded video? That's a very good question. Another thing you can do is store your video on a little SD memory card. These really are excellent options nowadays. The reason because they're small, they're low cost, and now you get a lot of memory for very little money. So a lot of security cameras have a little slot where you can insert that card. These cards can be used as either primary storage, all the video gets stored on them, or as a backup in case your internet connection goes down. If you're going to use SD cards for this, I do advise everybody buy what's called a high endurance SD card. Those are the ones that are actually meant to be used for surveillance applications. And as an example, you can get a 256 gigabyte SD card for only $40, which will hold about 3 weeks of continuous 2 megapixel video. So it doesn't cost much money to store a lot of video. Another option is, of course, the network video recorder. And those of us who remember, digital video recorders, recording things on your VCR, know what this is all about. You're actually recording this. In this case, you're recording it on a hard drive, a computer hard drive, but it's just a box that records that video. In this case, you can have multiple cameras. You can record for days or even weeks of continuous video footage if you want to. And the nice thing about these is these are configured so you will have an interface where you can watch your video, for example, on your smartphone. So these are really very sophisticated little devices you can use. They're really specialized computers in a box. Generally, you can buy these. They're bundled with multiple bullet or dome cameras. The nice advantage to these is you don't have to pay any type of fee. You're storing the video yourself, so there's no cloud service fee. So this can be a money saver in the long run if you're willing to pay some more money up front. You got to be aware, however, depending upon the manufacturer, you may find your NVR only works for certain manufacturers or only specific camera types. So you got to be careful about the NVR you get. Also, there's the option of a personal computer to store stuff, and this, for example, is what I use. So you can take a personal computer, a PC or a Mac, and install software on it like Blue Iris or Security Spy. And what this does is this takes your computer and turns it into a video recorder. And what I always warn people about is if you're going to use your computer this way, you want to have a separate hard drive. You don't want to use the one that's on your computer that's storing all of your programs and your operating system. You want to get what's called, once again, a high endurance drive that's intended for video applications. Well, it turns out those are not expensive at all. You can get, for example, a 4 terabyte drive for only about $100 on Amazon, which can give you weeks or even months of video storage. The last option is something that you see used quite often in some businesses, and that is network attached storage, NAS. And this really, the best way to describe this is an external hard drive that doesn't need to be connected to a computer. It plugs right into your network. So this is really just a storage type that is plugged into your network but doesn't need to be connected directly to a computer. In fact, it can be hidden somewhere else in your business or your own. And the nice thing about this is it lets you create your own personal cloud server. And if someone, for example, were to damage or destroy or steal your computer or steal your cameras, as long as you hide away this NAS device, that's where your video is kept. So it gives you an extra measure of security. So what do you want to need to know about choosing the right camera system? Well, really, there's kind of a continuum of choices when you're looking at cameras. And we're going to kind of start from, professional security packages, which are very easy to use, but not that capable, all the way down to running software on your own dedicated computer, which is harder to do, but gives you a much more capable system. So let's first talk about professional security packages. So kinds of, for example, that Comcast or AT&T or ADT will install. So, for example, companies like Comcast, AT&T, ADT will typically bundle these with a security system they'll sell you. So they normally don't sell you these cameras by themselves. This will be part of a whole home monitoring system. This really, they'll typically only have a few models of cameras. It's kind of one size fits all. These are all fixed focal length, wide field of view. They're pretty expensive in terms of performance and quite often can only work with the company's own security service. Now, the advantages is they're very easy to set up. I mean, the company does all the work for you. They provide lots of support. And typically they're easy to use. But on the other hand, they tend to be expensive in terms of performance. Monthly fees you have to pay. A service contract may be required, and it's typically very hard to integrate any type of third-party equipment into the system. Next are cloud-based cameras, the next step up, and everybody's very familiar with these. So for example, Ring and Nest cameras. Ring is owned by Amazon, Nest is owned by Google. These are very familiar to a lot of people. They're very popular if you want to be a do-it-yourselfer. In this case, you buy as many or as few cameras as you want. You install them yourself, and typically the video is stored to the cloud, uploaded to the cloud. So what people normally use these for example, is to get smartphone alerts. So if somebody's at your front door, then you will get an alert. You can talk to that person. You will be aware of what's going on with these doorbell cameras. Ring and Nest. These are very common, very popular. Once again, there's a subscription plan you have to pay for in order to record video. Now, when you look at these types of cloud-based cameras, whether they're fixed cameras or doorbell cameras, once again, they're fairly easy to install and configure. There's plenty of technical support. It's easy to share the video clips with the police or with your neighbors. And you can typically integrate these into your smart home services. So if you have, for example, Alexa or Google Assistant, you can actually plug these cameras in and control them by voice. And you'll also find that some pretty sophisticated features are built into some of these cameras in terms of being able, for example, to detect a human figure if a person is walking into your yard, or even detect the faces of friends or family members. So they are quite sophisticated and getting to be more so. Disadvantages are, first of all, the camera selection tends to be limited. You've got to pay some type of fee in order to use them at their full capability. And also these cameras only work with the manufacturer's own cloud servers. So if your internet is down, then the cameras don't work. They're just paperweights. And especially if the company goes out of business, the camera is worthless. There's nothing you can do with it anymore. So one thing you have to make sure is you have a secure network. If your Wi-Fi drops out, then your cloud camera doesn't record anything. Now, if you want to look at a budget cloud camera, and this is one I'm very big on, I recommend this. It's the Wisecam V3. This can be purchased for about $36 on Amazon Prime. Unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic has had impacted supply chains, this camera used to be a lot cheaper. It used to be you could buy this camera for $19, but a lot of electronics are becoming more expensive, and this camera has been no exception, but it's still a bargain for what it can do. This is a fun little camera. First of all, it's weatherproof. You can use it indoor, outdoor. It's got 2 megapixel resolution. It's got two-way audio. It's got really good night vision. Just as with the Ring or the Nest cameras, it sends alerts to your smartphone. You have actually free cloud services for storage of video clips for 2 weeks. You don't have to pay for it. But if you want to get more sophisticated technology capabilities, you do have to pay extra. And the nice thing about this camera is you can install a micro SD storage card, and you can turn this little camera into a continuously recording camera. Hold about 4 days of video. All you need is a smartphone and Wi-Fi, and you're ready to go in just a matter of minutes. So, 10-minute installation process. Here's one I installed at my house. Here is some daytime video from that camera. It really works. Works very, very well. But the nice part is this. There's nighttime video. That's about 10 o'clock at night. So we're actually getting a good color image just from the illumination of the street light. So these are really amazing little cameras. And I always tell people, if you buy no other camera at all, buy a Wisecam, because it's a great little camera that records continuously. Now, obviously, the Wisecam doesn't compare to the kind of high-end, high-performance cameras I'm going to talk about in a minute, but at the price, it works really well. As I said before, you can actually get more sophisticated capabilities. You can detect human figures, automobiles. It's very useful, but it requires a subscription. But even that subscription is very cheap, only $15 a year. But again, just as with Ring and Nest, these cameras only work with the Wise cloud system, only work with the manufacturer system, and only works over your smartphone. That's the only way you can view them. But once again, despite those limitations, these tend to be pretty capable and very useful cameras. And Wise, incidentally, also is into the whole smart home market, so they also offer things like light bulbs and motion sensors and all other kinds of little gadgets that integrate into these cameras. Now, there are lots of other camera companies I haven't talked about, literally dozens. You know, if you go look, you can see them. Eufy, Arlo, those are other well-known brands and have very good cameras. And you're always seeing new manufacturers entering the marketplace. This is a very competitive market. It's, you know, at some point we're probably going to see some consolidation and acquisitions in the market, but it's still growing. There's obviously still a lot of interest in, you know, installing security products. Just be sure to do your research before you buy anything, because you're always going to have, you know, better features, new cameras being introduced. Make sure you get the latest and best. Get your money's worth out of it. Now, next step up after cloud-based camera systems are cameras with network video recorders. And we talked about that before. I mentioned that. These are the kinds of systems where you can, for example, get them in Costco or buy them at some big box electronics store. So in this case, you have the NVR, and it's usually going to be you know, bundled with, you know, 2, 4, 8, sometimes 16 cameras. In this case, all the video is stored on the NVR. Just has regular computer hard drives inside of it to store that video. And as you know, at a certain point, as the disk fills up, then old video gets erased. But you can, depending upon how big of a hard drive you have in it, you can store sometimes weeks of video. These generally tend to be hardwired with Ethernet cables, okay, either Ethernet or coax to make these work. Normally, when you get these, quite often everything's bundled together. You get the Ethernet cable, you get the cameras, you get the NVR, you get everything. You just have to install it, put everything up. But the nice thing about these systems is, if you have a hardwired system in particular, your video will still be recorded. So even if you lose your internet, the recording goes on because it's happening over a cable. And then later on, if your internet comes back, you can check your phone and you can go back and look at the video that got recorded. So this provides you some redundancy, some security to make sure you don't lose any valuable information or lose some video of some crime that took place. Once again, with NVRs, you have to be careful when you buy them, because some brands of NVRs are going to be specific to certain types of cameras. So, for example, an Axis NVR will usually only work with an Axis camera. But the thing about these NVRs is the newest, the latest and greatest NVRs are becoming incredibly sophisticated. A great deal of artificial intelligence is now being built into modern high-end camera systems. So for example, you can now buy an Amcrest NVR, which in this case detects, recognizes, and identifies faces and stores a database of multiple individuals. So for example, you're a business owner. There's a person who's been coming into your store and shoplifting. You can put that person's face into this NVR. And then the next time this person enters your store, you'll get an immediate alert this person has walked into your store. So this is the kind of capability that just 10 years ago you only saw at very large companies or at government installations. But now you can buy this equipment yourself. And it's not that expensive. It's a few $100s to get an NVR like this. So you can do things like, counting people, recognizing human figures, recognizing vehicles, cars that drive by. So all of this is now available in some of the higher-end systems. A couple of companies that sell these types of bundle systems: Lorex, Amcrest. Okay, some of them will only support power over Ethernet or HD over coax, but others can also support Wi-Fi. So you'll see that as an option for some. And you'll find a lot, for example, Lorex is a very popular brand for Costco and Walmart and other retailers. And Lorex is an interesting company because a few years ago their quality wasn't that good, but Dahua bought them out. And now most Lorex cameras are really just rebranded Dahua cameras. And so the quality of a Lorex system can actually be pretty good nowadays. But regardless, if you're going to buy one of these bundled systems from some retailer, your quality and reliability can vary very much. And I always tell people, be sure to check reviews carefully before you buy. Make sure you get something you're going to be happy with. Finally, at the very end of the scale in terms of difficult to use but also extremely capable is what we talked about before: security software running on a dedicated computer. Now, the key to this is that these more expensive and higher end cameras, although some aren't that expensive, I mean some are less than $100, but these cameras actually have web servers. You can actually take a web browser and log in to a built-in browser in that camera. Turns out what you think is a camera is really a very powerful computer with an optical sensor and lens connected to it. What this allows you to do is go through and adjust a whole lot of parameters in terms of the performance of that camera. So things like video resolution, exposure, brightness, contrast. You can point the camera, zoom it in, zoom it out. You can configure it for some kind of cloud service or to upload files or to send you email alerts. There are all kinds of options that you can do with these cameras, and this interface gives you that very precise control. So with that type of control, this gives you other options for building a really comprehensive security system. So you can use the cameras by themselves. For example, put in an SD memory card and just let the camera record by itself and log into that web interface. You can connect it to an NVR. You can upload the video to your own cloud server, your own NAS server, or send them to your cell phone. But you can also connect them to a computer. You can take a dedicated PC or Mac computer and install software such as Blue Iris or Security Spy, two very popular packages. What you get is something that has the same advantages as a network video recorder or a network attached storage, but no monthly fees for the storage. You have a very powerful interface, and what you find is once you learn how to use it, you can do some pretty amazing things with these systems. But I always tell people this is not something I recommend for the computer shy. It really helps to understand something about computer networking. It's also very helpful to be willing to wade into the software and kind of really learn all the ins and outs of what the software can do for you. So what this allows you to do is you can take your computer, and in fact I have a system like this. I have got an iMac running Security Spy with a whole lot of different cameras running and connected to that. What it does is it lets you kind of mix and match. You can take different cameras from different manufacturers and you can customize those into a single system. So your computer becomes a DVR, has all the high-end web servers, it has a cell phone interface, so I can do everything you can do with a DVR. I can look at things on my cell phone, I can record video, I can optimize each camera for best performance. You have to have some additional wiring and what are called PoE network interfaces and switches in order to complete your installation. But once you do this, you've got a pretty capable little system. So your initial costs are higher. This is higher even than an NVR. Getting the software, getting the computer, running all the cables, and buying all the cameras. But what you have is a system that you want to run 24/7, continuous video, which means sometimes it's useful to invest in a UPS system in case of power failure. And of course, you've also got to buy the software, the Blue Iris or the Security Spy software, but these generally are very good pieces of software. They're frequently updated. There's support for them. So both of these are software packages I can recommend. And this really is your best option. If you want a customized, what I call best-of-breed system for a home or small business, this can provide it for you. So what about some recommendations, some guidelines for cameras and how to use them? Well, here's the second question people ask me after what camera to buy. They then ask me, well, gee, Tim, what cameras do you recommend? What cameras do you use? Well, Dahua. It's one of the companies I was talking about earlier, Dahua and Hikvision, two very well-known Chinese companies. Dahua has some of the best bang for the buck, in my opinion, in terms of getting a good camera. First of all, they have a very, very wide selection of cameras for all different types of applications. If you need a camera to do a specific function, Dahua sells it. They literally have hundreds of models. There's only one problem. There's no direct US support. You have to buy them from Chinese vendors or from resellers here in the US. The Chinese vendors will get you the best prices, but you got to make sure you're not getting a gray market model. So buyer beware. But in terms of the performance and in terms of price, this really is my go-to camera for my home security system. I use more Dahuas than anything else. But along the same lines, Amcrest. Amcrest is really nothing but a Dahua rebranded retailer. They take Dahua equipment, they provide US-based support, and they put their name on it. But because they're selling Dahua equipment, Amcrest has a much wider variety of cameras than you can get out of Ring or Nest or Arlo. So once again, you have literally dozens of good different camera models that they sell that you can buy. And the nice thing about Amcrest NVRs, which are really nothing more than a Dahua NVR, is they will work with all different types of cameras as long as they comply with a particular standard called the ONVIF standard. So, just like Dahua cameras, Amcrest cameras, you can configure them to be used with Security Spy or Blue Iris. Put together your own, custom system. And I therefore recommend Amcrest along with Dahua as a good choice, because if you want US-based support, then you can do that. And if you also want more options than just what you get with Ring or Nest, then this really is a great camera to buy, a great series of cameras to look at. Now, Amcrest, incidentally, because of their cameras are so sophisticated, you can do other tricks with them. So, if you don't want to take the camera and plug it into your computer or plug it into an NVR, Amcrest offers their own cloud service, just like Ring or Nest. You can pay to store your video in the cloud for a monthly fee, of course. Most of these cameras will have an option for an SD card, so you can actually record video directly on the camera itself. All right. So, in terms of cloud cameras, what are my recommendations? Well, Ring, Nest, and Wise are really the cameras I would recommend if you want a low-cost kind of starter camera. Ring and Nest, the reason why I pick those is really for nothing more than the fact they're owned by Amazon and Google. There are other good cameras out there. Arlo and Eufy, for example, are good cameras. But when a company is owned by Amazon or Google, they're in it for the long run. There's very little chance your camera is going to quit working one day because Amazon and Google go out of business. That's not going to happen. So they're both competing in the long run. Now, Wyze cameras, the video quality is very comparable to Ring and Nest. And although, Wyze is not necessarily a company that may be here in 20 years, I hope they are. But the point is at the price you can buy these cameras for and the quality, I still recommend them. I still like them very much. Now, if price is not an object, if you want to buy a camera, then there are other companies you can go to. And, if you're looking for a real professional installation, Axis, Avigilon, Verkada, these offer very high-end security camera installations. These are normally meant for businesses or healthcare or educational or government institutions. They typically don't sell them to individual consumers, but certainly if you're willing to pay the money, you can get these installed. With these types of systems, you can build some incredibly capable systems, incorporating dozens or even hundreds of cameras. So these companies provide a lot of support, but obviously you have to pay for it. And as an example of Verkada, okay, Verkada, their cameras, they're a fairly recent entrant into the market. They basically have a very important selling point. Verkada says that a lot of people are concerned about Chinese access or Chinese vendors. Is there a backdoor in this camera? Can I install this camera in some sensitive installation and not be certain that someone isn't spying on me through that camera? Well, Verkada says that's why we take our cameras and we manufacture and design them outside of China. So, we control these. These are built over in the West, not in China. So here we can ensure there are no backdoors in the firmware. And so Verkada, for example, specifically markets to companies and to government installations where this kind of issue is important. So in these particular cameras, Verkada does not do DVRs, nor do they do cloud storage. They record everything on a memory card inside the camera itself. They handle everything. They handle the software updates. They handle the maintenance. They have very powerful facial recognition, which enables, for example, to control access into a building. But they also tend to be expensive. They're very capable, but you have to pay a great deal in order to use these cameras. You're really, in a sense, more like leasing them than you are actually purchasing them. Then if you have cameras, if you need a camera that has to be out in the middle of nowhere, there are options for that too. So for example, the Reolink Go. This is a camera with a solar panel with a built-in battery. In this case, it takes the video clips and it transmits them over the cell network. So this is a camera that's it's expensive, but if you're in a situation where you can't connect it to Wi-Fi, can't run a cable to it, this is a camera that will work where no other will. So where do you begin? Okay, some general guidelines I always tell people. Guideline number 1, any security camera is better than no security camera at all. And I always tell people that. Having something is better than nothing. It doesn't matter what camera it is. Get a camera. Okay, first of all, they are a deterrent to crime. I know from personal experience that people will behave very differently when they know they're being recorded. And just even a single camera can tell you a lot. Even if the quality is not very good, it can tell you, for example, what time the crime took place, tell you how many people were involved, did they use a vehicle, how did they get there? But the nice thing about it is it gives you enough information. You can tell your neighbors, oh, at 1:21 a.m. last night, 2 guys tried to break into my car. Everybody else can check their cameras in and they know exactly what time to go look at. That's kind of very valuable information, even if your video quality is not that wonderful for the camera. So I always tell people, even if it's an inexpensive camera, buy at least one camera. Start with one camera. You can always expand later on and build your network. But one camera is better than none. Before you buy a security camera, make sure you'll be allowed to install it and use it. So, different types of laws apply where cameras are concerned. First of all, You certainly have the right here in the U.S. to record video of public areas, streets and sidewalks. Audio can be problematic. There are wiretapping laws. So I personally don't ever try to record audio outside of my house. Don't really need it. But thing of it is you always can record a street or a sidewalk or things passing by your home. Now, something people always talk about is there a problem with me recording my neighbor's yard? Okay. The answer is typically no. If there's no reasonable expectation of privacy, in other words, if your neighbor's front yard is visible publicly from the street, there's really nothing wrong with you recording. So if you're recording, for example, you're in the front yard of your own house, and your camera also happens to record the yards of your neighbors across the street, this is something anybody could see walking by. So it's not like there's anything wrong with you doing that. You're allowed to do that. But obviously, there are peeping Tom laws. So, for example, if you point your camera into your neighbor's bedroom on the second floor, that will get you into trouble. Obviously, that is not something that is obviously there's a reasonable expectation of privacy for something like that. But, in terms of recording around your home, recording incidentally, your yards of your neighbors or something on the street, you're allowed to do that. Now, if you are renting or leasing, I always tell people, make sure you talk to your landlord. Make sure that your landlord has no issue with you putting up an external camera or video doorbell. Also keep in mind some homeowners associations prohibit putting up any types of cameras at all. So watch out for that. And if you're a landlord, for example, your short-term rental, you're doing an Airbnb or something like that, okay, and you want to install cameras, I recommend you talk to a lawyer if you're going to put cameras inside the house. So be very, very careful with that. So when in doubt, always consult with a lawyer first to make sure you're not going to be having any trouble in any issues or any concerns putting up those cameras. Now, if you have an apartment or a condo with kind of limited window or door access, so maybe just a front door and a back door, and maybe one or two windows, then cloud-based cameras may work just fine. These you can put them first of all indoors. Keep an eye on elderly relatives, children, pets, family members. You can talk through them with somebody. They have two-way audio functions. And as I said before, these can be integrated with things like Amazon Echo Show and stuff like that, where you can actually see the camera feed on your Echo Show. You do want to be careful about monthly or annual costs, what it's going to cost to run these cloud cameras. They normally cost money. And I always warn people, okay, a lot of these cloud cameras are battery powered. Don't buy a battery-powered camera unless you're willing to climb ladders and swap out the batteries yourself. And so a lot of people don't appreciate that. It's very easy to install a battery-powered camera, and then the battery runs down because you just don't have time to climb that ladder and pull down that camera and then plug it in and recharge it. So be very, very careful, that you're willing to make that commitment. Now, if you've got a larger home or small business, a multi-camera NVR system may be a good choice for you. So you can kind of mount a camera at every door and every window. And in some cases, you can mix and match the types of cameras, like with Amcrest. There are some really good bundled systems you can get between $1,000 and $1,500 that give you pretty good cameras. And these tend, of course, to be wide-angle, fixed-focus images on the cameras. But you can mix and match and install like varifocal and pan-tilt zoom as well. So there are lots of options you can build with some of these systems. So this is a good choice if you're willing to take that next step up. And of course, if you feel very knowledgeable about computers, then really a do-it-yourself system is really going to be the best performance you can get for the money. You can combine all types of cameras, indoor cameras, wide-angle outdoor cameras, varifocal, pan-tilt zooms, and even cameras configured for license plate capture or recognition, which we're going to talk about. You can put that all into one system. Obviously, you got to spend some time learning how to optimize that, but it's worth it. And finally, if your time is limited, but cost is not an issue, then there are lots of professional security companies that will install systems for you. So, don't be afraid to call a company, find out what they can do for you, and get some quotes. Some other recommendations. Don't try to record video through a window from inside your house. I have people all the time tell me, I bought this camera, it doesn't work at night. And I find out the camera's inside the window. Problem is at night the camera tries to go into night vision mode, and the reflection from its own infrared diodes basically blinds the camera. Doesn't work. So you want to mount it outside, and that's really easy to do nowadays because these cameras most of these cameras tend to be weatherproof now. You also don't want to install the cameras too high. People will tell you that the optimal height is about 7 to 8 feet. Recording the tops of the heads isn't very useful. You want to see their faces. And most importantly, and I really recommend this, power over Ethernet. Doing it over an Ethernet cable works a lot better than Wi-Fi. You get better quality video, faster connection speeds. There's no worrying about interference from your neighbor's wireless networks. And since your cameras typically need AC power anyway, then why not just run an Ethernet cable and take care of data and power at the same time? So, I always tell people this: if you are building or renovating a home, install Ethernet cables. Okay, figure out all the places where you might want to put a camera, and then when you're doing the electrical wiring for the house, also run the Ethernet cables too. It's just that unfortunately, for too often, you see that it's an afterthought. Security is an afterthought. Even in some of the newer builds here in Nashville, people are simply not considering cameras. They just don't think about them, and then later on they realize they wish they had them. Now, if you've got a motion-controlled security light, I always tell people that a floodlight camera from Ring or Amcrest or Eufy, that's kind of a no-brainer. You can go ahead and you can take a motion sensing light and drop one of these in, and that gives you a video connection along with the motion spotlights that turn on. So this is I think a very good choice if your Wi-Fi network range goes out to where this camera is. I always tell people as well, mount cameras to monitor your streets and alleys around the house, not just the front and back porch. Doorbell cameras give you very limited visibility. I tell people all the time, Ring makes a good video doorbell, but a video doorbell is no substitute for a good security camera. And too often I see, Ring video where it only catches the edge of one person walking off of a porch, and then they walk out of sight. It was just a motion clip. You don't see any detail. You don't know how that person got onto your property. So, don't just record your front entrance of your home, but watch the whole property if you can. So, along with that, I always tell people that really, if you have a camera that supports continuous video, by all means, don't just do motion clips. Go ahead and just record continuously, because you never know what a motion activated camera might miss. I've seen too many camera videos where you see the back of the person as they walk off your porch with your package because the motion detection didn't kick in quickly enough. So in this case, just record continuously, and later on you can go back and check that feed and see what happened. It's always useful if you do this. Make sure you configure the camera so it gives you like little timestamps in the video. So if you need to use that as evidence in court, that's a handy thing to have. And the WiseCam, which we were just talking about, if you put a 32 gigabyte memory card into that, which is generally less than $15, that gives you 4 days of continuous video recording. So that's really very, very low cost nowadays. Another thing I tell people is resolution isn't everything. People always get hung up on numbers. So for example, you see, oh, well, gee, an 8 megapixel camera must be better than a 4 megapixel camera, which must be better than a 2 megapixel camera. Well, it depends. There's a lot of factors. So for example, here is an 8 megapixel image of my front yard. But here's my 2 megapixel camera, which is zoomed in on my car. So if somebody comes and tries to break into my car, I get a much better image of them. So, depending on your application, some 2 megapixel cameras with varifocal lenses are much better choices. Now I just want to talk very quickly about license plate capture and license plate recognition. License plate capture, if you're willing to do it, is incredibly valuable. The police love this kind of thing, because what's the first question that the police will ask you? If somebody in a car committed a crime on your street, did anybody get a license plate? And it turns out it's not that difficult nowadays with modern cameras to record those license plates. Now, you can't do it with a Ring or a Nest camera. Those aren't capable. But for a reasonably low price, about $250, for example, you can get a Dahua camera with 12x optical zoom. It's a great choice for license plate capture. Now, if you're going to do this, a license plate capture camera should be dedicated solely to recording license plates. You can't record the general area and the license plate at the same time. It won't work. So these have to be additional cameras you put in. Generally, you want to have 2 cameras. If you're, for example, on your street, you want to be able to capture video and cars going in both directions. And placement, finding the right place to put the cameras is always going to be an issue. You got to make sure that the view's not going to be blocked. But if you get the right kind of camera, one that supports high frame rates, say 20 frames per second, or fast shutter speeds from 1/1000th to 1/2000th of a second, you can get very clear plate images of cars driving by 40 or 50 miles an hour without any problem at all, or faster. Now, if you're going to do license plate capture, this is usually best done in continuous recording mode, and you want to record it on like an NVR or record it on your computer. Now, if you live on a street with low traffic, license plate capture works great. It's a great choice. So if, say, only 20 or 30 cars drive by your home every day, you don't need anything more sophisticated than a good camera that can record those plates and just have that running into an NVR. And you can configure it so it works on either daytime or nighttime. But if you live on a street with lots of traffic volume, then your next step up may be license plate recognition. For example, 7,000 cars a week drive past my home. So that's way too many cameras or license plates for me to just keep track of, just recording them. So instead, you have software that reads those plates and then stores them on the computer, a list of those plates. Now, license plate reader cameras, LPR cameras, they're in the news a lot nowadays. In fact, right now, the Metro City Council is debating setting up a pilot program here in Nashville with LPR cameras. And the idea is pretty straightforward, that you have these cameras set up, they read the license plate, and this is just optical character recognition. Okay, so the way you can scan in a document and convert it into a Word document, same thing. So they were doing this on the video feed. They scan the plates as they go by, and they check each plate against a hot list that the police provide. And if they get a hit, and it says that's a stolen plate, a plate from a stolen car, then the police get an immediate alert. They are saying, okay, at this particular camera installed at this address, a stolen plate of this type just went by. And here's an image of it, and here's the plate reading. And the police can check that, and they can dispatch officers to go check it out. So this is a great crime-fighting tool. And in fact, if you look at communities here in Nashville, so for example, we look at Hendersonville, they are using these types of systems. So for example, here's a little news report where within 12 hours, they recovered 2 stolen vehicles. And as the police point out, that stolen cars enable other crimes. So they enable other thefts, other robberies. When you have a criminal driving around in a stolen vehicle, you are giving them the opportunity to commit more crimes, including stealing more cars. Belle Meade has a system installed, and they've got an LPR system. Here, for example, they have a case where they once again had somebody who was wanted, who was basically committing other crimes and was in a stolen vehicle. And the moment that this person drove into Belle Meade, they were able to capture him. They got an immediate alert, and then they were able to go and arrest him and recover that vehicle. So this is very powerful, very invaluable technology. Mount Juliet. Okay, once again, Mount Juliet's got a very good system, Guardian Shield they call it. And so you see in the news all the time about getting hits from their cameras, and then getting warnings. Once again, you've got these vehicles, and I point out here that this was a vehicle that was stolen in Nashville on December 14th, was driven around by the thief for about 3 weeks in Nashville. We don't have an LPR system, but when they drove to Mount Juliet, the guy was immediately stopped. They got a hit on that camera, and then they were able to go out and stop them. So whatever crimes they were going to commit, they stopped those crimes, they recovered the vehicles, they arrested somebody who was wanted for a lot of other crimes. So this is a great crime-fighting tool, LPR systems. Well, it turns out it's really not that difficult nowadays to have your own LPR system. Really, all you need is a couple of good cameras. Like I said, the LPC cameras I've talked about, the DAWA camera, and you run a piece of software called Recourse Scout. You can run this on a personal computer, and all you're doing is you're feeding your video through the Recourse Scout software, and it does license plate reading and then creates a searchable list for you. You can also, in fact, even run the software on a little tiny single board computer. Very inexpensive, only a couple $100s for everything. And this works incredibly well. And this is what people don't really realize. License plate reading is not just for businesses anymore, or for government. Consumers can do it too. In fact, my own system has been very instrumental in a couple of, helping to capture some criminals on my own street. I'll show you an example a little bit later about that. So if you want to do your own LPR system, it's really not that expensive. Here kind of is kind of a cost breakdown. Okay, Jetson Nano, which is a little single board computer to run the software, a couple of LPR cameras, the DAWA cameras, and then you want to have one camera that's kind of gives you the overview, because as I said before, license plate reader cameras can only watch license plates. You want the bigger picture, and so an inexpensive camera does that for you. And you need a PoE switch for the cameras, power over Ethernet switch. Put that all together, and then it costs you less than $900. And on top of that, you then pay $10 a month for 2 camera licenses if you have 2 cameras. And so $5 per month per camera, $120 a year in order to run the software. It gives you 5 days of license plate storage, which is more than adequate for most home installations. Now, if you don't want to install your own LPR system, there are companies that will do it for you. So, Flock Safety, this is in the news. You will hear about Flock Safety. They install LPR camera systems all over the country. They tend to target small businesses, apartment complexes, neighborhoods. They're not really companies that try to sell to individual homeowners. They try to target, groups of homeowners. But they handle everything. They will handle the installation, the maintenance, they'll mount it. If cameras get stolen or damaged, they'll repair them. Cameras run on solar power. They use the LTE cellular network, so they're totally independent from the people, from the consumers. So all they have to have is a place to install the poles and put the cameras up. And they can store data for 30 days in terms of, what cars drove in and out of a neighborhood or passed by. The disadvantage is each camera costs $2,500 a year. So it's pricey. So that's the difference. Having somebody take care of it for you, do all the work for you, versus the lower cost of you doing it yourself. Now, these cameras are not marketed to individual homeowners, Flock Safety, but they are typically marketed to businesses and neighborhoods. In fact, you can, for example, combine a lot of people together. Say you've got a neighborhood of 200 homes, and you want to install 4 cameras. So there are 4 different, entrances that people will drive their cars past to get into your neighborhood. Well, actually, per household, it may not be that expensive. And in fact, there are neighborhoods here in Nashville that have installed these Flock Safety cameras and they divide that cost up between all the different residents in order to be able to watch for the vehicles that come in and out of their streets. So, some people have concerns. They say, gee, I don't want to be recorded. Well, Flock Safety actually lets you opt out of the system. Of course, you got to be careful, because if you do that, your license plate becomes invisible to the camera system, in which case, if someone steals your car, nobody's going to see it. The camera won't see it. So you got to be careful what you wish for. But here's a little illustration of how this camera works.
We begin with a Williamson County neighborhood going high-tech to help fight crime. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to News 2 at 10. I'm Bob Mueller.
And I'm Haley Wilgus. Neighbors in the Stockett Creek area can now take pictures and get information on every car that drives through their neighborhood. News 2's Kim Wynn explains how they're gathering that information and working with police.
Every car.
This is a clear shot of the vehicle.
From its color to its tag.
It has the license plate number, first day in the neighborhood.
Gets photographed and sent to a database that Ron Carlson and other homeowners in the Stockett Creek community can look up if there's ever a crime.
If there was an incident, we could open it up for a homeowner, we could open up for the police, but it reads the license plate 24 hours a day, daytime or nighttime.
The solar-powered camera and license plate reader was installed in October, a few months after a neighbor's home was broken into.
It was a house break-in. You're just typical someone going around the side of the house, jamming a patio door.
A crime Carlson says is rare for the neighborhood, but can still happen, so they got prepared.
It's all there for prevention and trying to find and solve crimes.
The HOA can go through cars by date. The system knows how many days the car has been there and if there are any serious violations.
If there was a vehicle that came in that had a warrant or some other item of concern, Williamson County Sheriff's Department would be notified.
A small piece of technology some neighbors say is well worth the peace of mind.
Knowing that we have the videography that we need, I feel much safer. I'm happy about it.
And right now, the neighborhood only has one camera. They say pretty soon they plan on installing another one at their second entrance. The pictures are stored and kept in the database for 30 days. Bob?
So here's kind of an illustration of what Stockett Creek is doing. Here is their neighborhood. It's only accessible with 2 entrances. And they had installed one camera here. They were about to install a second camera there. So you don't really need to put the cameras everywhere, these types of LPR cameras, just to the point where you know every car is going to drive by. And then as long as you have some, within the rest of the neighborhood, as long as you have some low-cost, simple little cameras like Wise cams, where you can see the vehicle and what's going on and the perpetrators, then you can record their plates as they drive in and out of the neighborhood, and then you know who did it. So, really, it doesn't require that many cameras to get a pretty effective security system for a neighborhood. So, what does the future hold in terms of what can we expect over the next few years in security camera technology? Well, first of all, we can expect cameras with better optics and better performance at lower prices. I'm hoping that in the not too distant future, somebody is actually going to offer an LPR camera for like Ring or Nest. We'll see if that happens. But one thing we can see is going to happen is things like human figure and face tracking and facial recognition. Those are going to become a standard feature in very low-cost consumer cameras. So right now, these kinds of features, you see them in the pricier cameras. That's going to filter down into the less expensive cameras. And any laws that prohibit facial recognition typically only apply to government agencies. They don't apply to private citizens and businesses. You can do this yourself. Another thing that's going to happen is you're going to see networked neighborhood cameras. You're going to see people starting to combine their cameras together into kind of a comprehensive, what I call a virtual neighborhood watch. So you can monitor the streets at night in your neighborhood just by working with your neighbors. So consider, for example, this kind of scenario a few years from now, where there's a burglar who came through your neighborhood and broke into lots of people's cars, several residents' cars. Well, this gets uploaded into that neighborhood camera system. Then one night, you get a notification that this person is back in your neighborhood. But it's not just you, it's everybody in the neighborhood. Because everybody each has their own camera set up at their own home that's pointing out to the street. And they're all getting the notification because they're all part of that network. At the same time, while you're recording this person trying to break into cars again, the police have also been notified. In fact, what I expect is going to happen with some of these neighborhood watch groups, virtual watch groups, is probably the police are going to be tied into the camera network themselves. So this becomes extra eyes for the police. They don't just have the cameras that are supplied by the city, but also they have the assistance of neighborhood residents who are willing to share their cameras with the police so that they can spot it whenever these types of crimes occur. Then there's the next step. The Ring Always Home Cam is expected to hit the market sometime later this year or early next year. It's going to be a flying drone inside your home. with the camera, so you can fly it around inside your house and see what's going on. I think the next step we're going to see after that is eventually we're going to see outdoor drones with security cameras. They're going to be deployed both by individuals and by neighborhoods. That is coming, and it's going to probably happen sooner than we all think. So, a few final recommendations to everybody. First of all, there are lots of good places to buy this type of security video equipment. Amazon, of course, is a great vendor. Home Depot and Lowe's carry things like Ring and Nest and Wise and other brands. B&H Photo Video is a pretty good vendor if you want a Dahua or Hikvision camera. AliExpress sells cameras direct from China, but you got to be very careful because you want to make sure you get a good model that's not a gray market model. You don't want to get a counterfeit model. So you got to be very careful. Make sure you work through a trusted vendor. There are dozens of different brands. You want to definitely do your homework. Check the reviews. Look at the specifications. Make sure you are buying the camera you really need. There is a website, IP Cam Talk. This is an excellent source if you want to be a do-it-yourselfer. If you want to learn how to install and pick your own cameras and configure the stuff yourself, then you can get lots of advice. There is a great reference, a great wiki that's on this website. I highly recommend it if you really want to just dive into being the go-to camera person. And you really want to consider as well that no security camera is a substitute for good security practices. Make sure you install an alarm system. Okay, participate in a neighborhood watch. Talk to your neighbors. Okay, the best security system is all your neighbors. Be informed of what's going on in terms of any criminal activity, and make sure, as always, the Metro Nashville Police tell you to report suspicious people and incidents to them. And also, if you do install cameras, check those feeds on a regular basis. Don't ignore your cameras for weeks at a time. Every day or two, make sure they're working. Make sure there's nothing going wrong. You don't want to be caught where you suddenly realize your camera, the battery in it died long ago, or something went wrong and it just quit working. So in closing, I want to talk about a little incident that happened with my camera system. And this kind of goes with something I tell people, that security cameras are like seatbelts in a car. Most of the time you never think about them or notice them, but every once in a while you're really glad you have them. And here's an example. This happened about 2 years ago. There was a post on Nextdoor about somebody, one of my neighbors just a few houses down, somebody tried to get into a car that her daughter was in while she was inside her house. And they had this car behind their garage. And some guy walked up behind the house and tried to get into the car. And the daughter started screaming. This guy jumped in the car and drove off. So I contacted her. I said, when did this take place? And she told me her best guess. And what was interesting about this is I knew where the location of their house was. And there were only 2 ways you could get into this back behind their house, either from Linden Avenue or Beechwood. And the only Beechwood entrance was within view of one of my cameras. So they had a general description. They knew what time it happened. Said it looked like a Taurus. I said, I wonder if my cameras recorded that car. So, and now here's the entrance to the alley. Notice it's about 12:49, and notice that car turn up that alley. That's interesting. So I went and I checked some of my other cameras. Here's the car. Okay. Here's the license plate. It wasn't a Taurus, okay, but it certainly fit the general description of a 4-door Silvers type car. So I contacted my neighbor across the street, and he had cameras in the alleyway, and he could actually see down the alleyway to where that car, to where that home was, even though he couldn't directly see the garage, but he could see my neighbor's home from that back entrance. And through one camera, you could barely see the guy park the car, walk across. Then he came running back after the daughter screamed. The car came up the alleyway, turned, and then drove out. And if you zoom in on this plate, it was the same plate I recorded. That was the guy. So I contacted the police. I contacted my neighbor, told her the plate. Police detective. So I spoke to a police detective, and he said, that plate is stolen. That car was stolen weeks ago. Well, that was interesting because I went back and I checked my LPR system. This car had been driving by my house several times a week, literally for weeks. this guy had been driving the stolen car like he owned it. Well, I put in an alert into my LPR system so that the next time that car drove by, it would send an email to the police detective. And what do you know? Literally within an hour after I sent in that alert, the guy drove by. I immediately emailed the detective. I said, "Did you get that email? This guy just went past my house, went by the house." He said, "I got it." He later told me he jumped in his car. He said that was the first pursuit he had done in years. But the guy bailed. They didn't catch the guy. He bailed on the car, but they recovered the vehicle. They later found evidence that that they were able to determine his identity because he got out of the car so fast, he left some stuff behind. Turned out he was wanted on multiple felonies. In fact, they caught him, and the daughter who was in the car he tried to get into actually wound up testifying in his trial. So this basically got a very bad guy off the street, and it was enabled by the camera system I had installed. So this is what you can do with a home-owned camera system. This is what kind of capability you can have. So, any questions? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, let's see, let me switch out of this, stop share. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, I just want to show you guys a few things. First of all, some examples of cameras. So, of course, this is your little WiseCam version 3, WiseCam V3. This is a mini bullet. Okay, somewhat larger camera. This is the kind of things you see, for example, in those systems you can buy at Costco, the multi-camera DVR systems. These are very common, fixed focus cameras. Then you've got larger cameras. This is a full-size bullet. So these are the kind of cameras you can use, for example, for reading license plates. These have zoom lenses in them and things like that. So these tend to be larger, but very, very capable in terms of what they can do. And then you got these types of cameras. Now this is a big camera, but this is a camera that can do some amazing things. This is a pan tilt zoom type camera. And this type of camera, once installed, will let you you can check, and as I'd always tell people, I can watch cockroaches crawling up the steps of my neighbors, across the street if I wanted to. That's how good these cameras can be. So you can do some pretty amazing stuff with cameras like this. This kind of gives you the different kind of range of sizes and things like that. All right. So I just wanted to kind of show those different examples of the cameras. I also want to show this as well. So this gives you an idea of what's going on right now around my house. Front porch, front yard, behind my house, okay, my car parked right in front of the house. These two dark screens are the license plate cameras. It will capture plates going by. The side of my house, the carport out back, each up and down the side of the alleyway, and the the views to the side of my house, pointing to the right and to the left of my house. So I've got all these cameras set up, to give me basically, as I tell people, no sparrow shall fall around my home. Now, obviously, this is a fairly elaborate system. I've kind of built it up over time, but none of these cameras individually is that expensive. Really, the big expense was running the cables, running the Ethernet cables, and getting all that installed, getting the installation. But the cameras themselves are pretty capable at pretty low cost, and they're also very, very reliable. So you can build yourself an incredibly comprehensive system. And then you see a car go by, capture the plate. If I were to go back and look at that, I could read that plate. So this is the kind of thing you can do with a modern camera system. If you want to invest the money, you can have a system like that. And you can do some pretty astonishing things in terms of comparing what people think you could do with a Ring or a Nest or something like that. Now, obviously, you don't have to be ultra elaborate, but even a single camera that points at a street just like this can tell you a lot in terms of what goes on if there's, for example, somebody comes along late at night and is checking doors and trying to break into cars. So just to give you an idea of what you can do. All right. Okay, well, it's been a pleasure. I'm seeing somebody. I'm trying to take a drink from a fire hose. Okay, well, Now, incidentally, if anybody wants to ask any questions, what I can do is if you do the raise your hand icon at the bottom, I can turn on your audio if you want to ask a question. I'll be glad to answer any questions right now. So, anybody have anything they would like to ask? Okay, so Martin and Bill, looks like you both want to ask a question. So, Martin, you first. What can I do for you?
Okay, so how far along is the legality of these license plate readers? I know Belle Meade has them, and I inquired over there, and they said that Metro is trying to get it, but they couldn't install them, and the company couldn't install them in adjacent neighborhoods like in Green Hills because they weren't legal. How far away are we from being allowed to install them in like Green Hills neighborhoods?
Well, I can tell you right now, if you want to install your own personal license plate reader cameras, then nothing prevents you from doing it right now, just like I've done. All right.
On the premises of our condominium?
As long as your condo association is willing to install these, and then there's no issue with legality. The only ordinance against installing these license plate cameras was installing them on city or public property, not on private property. And there was an attempt by a couple of city council members to try to make private LPR cameras illegal, and that was quashed because, as it turned out, some attorneys said you can't do that. You can't stop a person from installing their own system and running their own system. So right now, you can certainly have your own private system. In fact, there are neighborhoods in Nashville right now, homeowner associations that have flock safety cameras. So they're running them right now. And I don't know
Right,
if any,
I realize that.
Yeah.
One of them was right next to ours over here in Green Hills, in the villages of Burton Hills. I realized that, and I didn't think that it was legal at the time.
No,
but apparently,
it's completely legal. Now, like I said, there are some city council, Metro council members who wanted to make them illegal, but it never went anywhere. And I would joke with people. I said, well, I expect the police to kick in my door any day and arrest me. But believe me, the police are very grateful for the information I provided. I've helped recover a couple of stolen cars and helped in the arrest of a couple of people with multiple felonies with my cameras. Not to mention solving several burglaries in my neighborhood. So the police love that information when they can be provided. So I'm
Sure.
very much in support of the city being able to install these LPR camera systems. And right now there is a proposed ordinance that is before the city council. It looks like that there's actually now a lot of support to install these cameras because people realize they're great crime fighting tools. And you look at all the cities around Nashville that are using them very successfully for that. So I think Nashville is eventually going to get with the times. I think what's going to be happening is they're going to have a 6-month pilot program. There are people who are concerned about privacy implications and the cameras being abused, but with proper oversight, which the current ordinance they're proposing would provide, these things can be avoided. We can have a safe system that doesn't violate anyone's privacy. I mean, really what you're looking for is you're looking for plates of stolen cars and cars driven, by people who are wanted by the police. Those are the kinds of things you're triggering on, nothing more. And you can certainly, protect the privacy of citizens, in neighborhoods, but at the same time, stop the epidemic of stolen cars here in Nashville. And that's really what it comes down to. Nashville is a mecca for stolen cars because the police don't have the resources to locate these cars. You'll have people who will drive in Nashville for weeks in a stolen car. What gets them caught is they drive into Belle Meade or they drive into Mount Juliet, and then they immediately get nabbed. So that's why we need to do that, because that gets a handle on the stolen car problem here in Nashville. And if you remove a stolen car driven by a criminal, you're probably also going to stop a lot of other crimes that are going to be committed in that stolen car.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. All right.
So
Thanks for the webinar. It was great. Great. A lot of information.
Thank you very much. Okay. So, Bill, you have a question?
Yeah, Tim. I have an ADT system, alarm system with a doorbell camera.
Yeah.
I want to install more cameras, but my concern is the bandwidth required for a Wi-Fi based system. so that's, I have theoretically the fast AT&T fiber
Yeah.
system, but I'm still having issues with other devices around the house that are connected to the Wi-Fi system. My printer specifically, because it seems to be knocked off the Wi-Fi system every time the door opens.
Well, let me ask you a question. What type of Wi-Fi router are you using in your home?
It's the AT&T provided
Okay.
router, modem router
Okay.
combined.
There's your problem. Okay.
Okay.
I've got AT&T Gigafiber too. I turned off their Wi-Fi. I installed an Eero Wi-Fi 6 mesh system in my house, which gives far superior coverage. I don't think the problem is so much the bandwidth as it is the range of your Wi-Fi. I mean, I really recommend these tri-band mesh systems, these Wi-Fi 6 systems you can buy now, because they give you, they basically, they avoid the issue of interference. I mean, Bill, I know where you live. You're surrounded by homes with Wi-Fi. Everybody's system is interfering with everybody else's. A tri-band mesh system gives you that extra bandwidth that allows these types of cameras to work. So my personal advice is if you want to install more Wi-Fi cameras and get good performance out of them, is you need to upgrade the Wi-Fi in your house. I mean, keep the AT&T Gigafiber. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But don't rely upon their Wi-Fi. Turn that off in the router and then install your own mesh network, and you will be much, much happier.
Okay.
I faced exactly the same issues you're facing right now.
Yeah.
The mesh router solved them.
Okay.
All right.
The Eero brand.
Yeah, the new Eero Wi-Fi 6 tri-band is what you want. That's a great. I mean, now it's pricey. Okay, it's a little pricey. It's like $600.
Yeah.
But it to me it's worth it because I want reliable bandwidth everywhere in my house.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, for me, it's important. I'm willing to pay the price. Okay.
Yeah. I have one extender, which sort of works, but it's still marginal coverage in.
No, you want a mesh system, and Eero is a good system. There are other Wi-Fi 6 systems by other companies, Orbi, TP-Link, Netgear, so you can look at those as well. But
Yeah.
you want to get a Wi-Fi 6 tri-band mesh network.
Okay.
And they're the priciest, but they are also the best performance. And especially when you're in an environment where you're surrounded by other people with Wi-Fi, and everybody's Wi-Fi is interfering with each other.
Right.
Believe me, it's worth paying the money for. So that's my bit of advice, and then you'll find your Wi-Fi cameras work much better. Now, but keep in mind, one solution, as always, is to go and put in wired cameras, run Ethernet cable, PoE.
Yeah.
If you want to get really good quality video, you can always rely on. Don't use Wi-Fi. Go with wired Ethernet. If you're willing to install that cable, pull that cable, or pay someone to install it, it's worth it. It really is, because I mean, you can see what I can do with my cameras. I could not do what I do with my cameras with wireless. I do that with wired cameras, and that's where you get the really, really good camera performance.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions. I do see, of course, like I said, the comment, it was like drinking from a fire hose. Well, I've heard that before. People say that. It's like, you tried to make us drink through a fire hose. And yeah, believe me, I throw everything at you here. But once again, I'm recording this. I'm going to make it available for anybody to watch. So in the future, by all means, invite people to sit down and watch this, look at it, give you the information you need. All right. Guys, everybody, thank you very much. It has been a real pleasure. I hope the next time I give this presentation, I'll have more interesting video of flying cameras on drones that we can show and other interesting new developments. And hopefully next time we'll be able to do all of this in person and be able to once again have a nice little get-together presentation as we used to. So let's all keep our fingers crossed. And I will see everybody in the next presentation. But good luck with your camera choices and your decisions. And once again, if you got any quick questions, feel free to drop me an email or send me a message on Nextdoor. Glad to answer it for you. Thanks, everybody, and good night.